She belonged on the street, not on this runway. Those 4 words, muttered into a radio by a TSA officer who never learned her name, would follow Captain Victor Hale for the rest of his life. Rain hammers the private tarmac at Midway Executive like a punishment nobody ordered. The blue security flood strobe across the slick asphalt in slow, rhythmic sweeps, lighting everything for half a second, swallowing it back into dark. The private terminal stands quiet and indifferent behind its glass wall, the way expensive things always stand when people bleed in front of them. Out on the apron, between the jet stairs and the perimeter fence, something is happening that wasn't on anyone's itinerary tonight. 2 TSA officers have a young woman pinned to the ground. Her white cane has skidded 15 feet across the wet tarmac. Her oversized dark glasses, the big ones, the kind that wrap around the eyes completely, are twisted sideways on her face, one lens cracked clean down the center. Her blazer is soaked through. Her bare feet smear thin pink streaks across the asphalt as she fights for footing she cannot find. She is not crying. She is not begging. She is screaming, and every word is a blade aimed at one specific man. The pilot is lying. Don't get on that plane. It's a trap. One officer presses her arms behind her back. The other mutters something into his radio and rolls his eyes at the jet stairs like he's apologizing to them. Vagrant on the apron again. Probably off her meds. He almost sounds bored. At the base of the stairs, the man those words are meant for has gone completely still. He is composed, sharp-jawed, dark-eyed, dressed in a suit that belongs in a boardroom 40 stories above this tarmac. His name is not the kind of name people say out loud at airports, but every person on this apron knows who he is, and every single one of them is watching him right now to see what he does next. His security detail has fanned into position behind him without being told. Trained hands move toward trained places. For 1 second, nobody breathes. Behind him, at the top of the jet stairs, Captain Victor Hale stands gripping the door rail with both hands. His uniform is pressed. His jaw is set in the particular way of a man working very hard to look like nothing is wrong. His knuckles, wrapped around that railing, are the color of old bone. The young man at the base of the stairs doesn't look up at the pilot. He looks down, across 10 feet of rain-soaked tarmac, through the strobing blue dark, at the screaming woman being pressed into the ground by men who have already decided she doesn't matter. He does not know her name. He does not know how she got here, or how she crossed a live runway barefoot in the dark, or what she could possibly have heard that drove her to do something this desperate. But he knows that voice. He heard it once before, just once, just briefly, and filed it in the back of his mind the way you file something you didn't expect to need. That voice belongs to the flower girl at Gate 7. The one who sold gardenias outside the private terminal. The one he stopped for this morning without entirely knowing why. His hand comes up. One gesture. Almost casual. His security team goes still. The officers holding her pause, confused, looking to each other for a protocol that doesn't exist for this moment. The rain keeps falling. The pilot's knuckles tighten on the railing above them all. Cut to black. 3 questions are now burning in the dark where this scene used to be: who is she, really, and what does a blind woman sell flowers to survive for, in a terminal full of people who walk past her like she's furniture? What did she hear tonight, in the dark that made crossing a live airport runway feel like the safer option? And why, before he knows a single fact, does the most dangerous man on this tarmac already believe her? To understand any of that, you have to go back. Not years. Not even weeks. Just 24 hours, to a Tuesday morning when the sky was clear, the gate was humming with the quiet arrogance of old money, and a young man in an expensive suit did something so small it shouldn't have mattered at all. He stopped. 24 hours earlier, the sky above Midway Executive was the particular shade of blue that Chicago only produces in October, sharp, clean, and cold enough at the edges to remind you that winter is not asking permission this year. There was no rain yet. No strobing lights. No blood on the tarmac. There was only Rose, and her cart, and the morning. The aluminum flour cart was exactly where it always was, anchored to the pavement 6 feet left of the Gate 7 entrance, positioned so the overhang above the private terminal doors kept the blooms out of direct wind without blocking foot traffic. Rose had chosen that spot herself, 3 years ago, during a trial-and-error process that took 4 days and taught her more about how wealthy people moved through space than any sociology textbook ever could. Gardenias on the left. Sunflowers in the center. Red carnations on the right. This was not aesthetics. This was architecture. The gardenias went left because the prevailing morning breeze at Gate 7 moved west to east, which meant the scent drifted forward across the entrance path. Passengers walking in caught it before they saw the cart, which meant by the time they reached her they were already leaning toward yes. The sunflowers went center because they were tall and yellow and visible from 40 feet away to people who relied entirely on their eyes to decide what deserved their attention. The carnations went right because carnation buyers, deliberate, repeat, unhurried, came from the parking structure side, and the right edge of the cart was the first thing they reached. Rose had never seen any of this. She had figured all of it out by listening. 3 years at Gate 7 had given her something that no one standing in that terminal fully understood and most of them would never have believed, a complete, precise, three-dimensional map of Chicago's private aviation elite, built entirely from the sound of how they walked. She knew the hedge fund manager from the 3rd floor of the Hancock building by the aggressive forward-driving heel strike of a man who had somewhere better to be before he even arrived where he was going. He passed her cart every Tuesday and Thursday without slowing. Never bought a flower. Never acknowledged she existed. She had named him, privately, Gerald, because he struck her as exactly the kind of man who insisted on being called Gerald instead of Jerry and considered this a personality. She knew the retired senator from the shuffling, deliberate placement of a man whose knees had outlived his ambition but whose dignity had not. He bought 2 gardenias every Friday, always paid with a folded bill, always said thank you, young lady in a voice that still carried the cadence of a rostrum even when it was just talking to a flower cart. She had enormous affection for him and hoped he never found out. She knew the corporate attorneys heading to LaGuardia by the rolling suitcase wobble, the particular rhythm of expensive luggage on pavement that varied by wheel quality, handle height, and the walker's arm length, which told her more about their billing rate than their business cards probably did. She knew the nervous first-timers by the way their footsteps hesitated at the terminal entrance, just for half a beat, the way a person hesitates before stepping into water they can't see the bottom of. She knew all of them. None of them knew her. This did not bother Rose the way people assumed it would when she told them, on the rare occasions she told anyone anything. It was simply the condition of the work, the same way a toll booth operator knows every car that passes and none of the drivers know them. You didn't need to be seen to build an understanding. Sometimes not being seen was the entire advantage. What bothered Rose, if she was going to be precise about it, and Rose was almost always precise, was the specific quality of invisibility that came not from being overlooked but from being dismissed. Those were different things. The senator didn't see her as a person, exactly, but he registered her presence with something adjacent to courtesy, which was enough. Gerald the hedge fund manager didn't register her at all, which was its own kind of neutral. It was the third category that had a weight to it. The ones who saw her, the cane, the glasses, the cart, processed the full image, reached a conclusion, and actively reorganized their path to avoid the possibility of interaction. Not cruelty. Something quieter and more total than cruelty. A decision, made in less than a second, that she was not a situation worth engaging with. She heard that decision in footsteps too. She had become very good at identifying it. Angelo Bruno walked past Gate 7 every Tuesday morning. Rose knew his footsteps the way she knew the sound of the fuel trucks, by frequency, weight, and the particular authority of something that did not need to announce itself to be taken seriously. His stride was unhurried in a way that was entirely different from the senator's deliberate shuffle. The senator was unhurried because his body had made the decision for him. Bruno was unhurried because he had decided, at some point, that urgency was something other people performed and he had no use for the performance. Four sets of footsteps always traveled with him. His security. She could distinguish them by now, the one with the slight right side lean who walked half a step ahead, the one whose left heel struck harder than his right, suggesting an old injury that had healed imperfectly, the two in the back whose footfalls were so disciplined they sounded almost identical, like matching pieces of furniture. Bruno himself never bought flowers. In 3 years, he had passed her cart 47 times, she had counted, not out of fixation but because counting things was how she kept the days organized when the days had a tendency to blur, and in 47 passes he had never slowed, never spoken, never acknowledged the cart or the girl behind it in any direction she could detect. She did not take this personally. She had heard his name whispered in this terminal enough times, in enough different registers of fear and reverence, to understand that a man like that did not stop for things unless stopping meant something. He was not Gerald, who dismissed her. He was something outside the categories she had built. A weather system that moved through on its own schedule and left the air changed without explaining itself. She had built no particular story about him, beyond the voice, which she had caught once, at a distance, in conversation with the gate manager. It surprised her. She had expected something that matched the whispers, cold, or sharp, or carrying the particular flatness of a man who had stopped needing to convince people of things. Instead it was low, and almost unhurried in its sound the way his footsteps were unhurried, and warmer at the edges than any voice that lived in a terminal full of fear had any right to be. She had filed that observation away and left it alone. He was going to walk past again today. She knew it before she heard him, Tuesday, 8:47 in the morning, the terminal doing its usual Tuesday morning thing where the hedge fund crowd moved through in the first wave and the private charter crowd came through in the second, and gate 7 smelled like jet fuel and someone's expensive coffee and the gardenias she'd taken in from the cold last night and wrapped in damp newspaper to keep them from going stiff. She heard the 4 security footsteps first. Then his. And then a crack in the pavement that she had navigated around 4,000 times without incident chose this particular Tuesday to catch the tip of her cane at the exact wrong angle, and the cane went sideways, and Rose went with it, one hand catching the edge of the cart hard enough to keep her upright but not hard enough to keep the cane from skidding across the pavement with a sound like a dinner fork dropped on tile. She heard it land. She heard, in the half-second after, the 4 security footsteps pause. And then, before any of the 4 could reach it, she heard a 5th set of footsteps, 1, 2, 3, and the cane was lifted from the pavement. She heard the weight of a person crouching and rising again. She heard him cross back to her. He placed the cane in her palm without fumbling for it. Didn't reach past her or around her. Didn't push it toward her the way people sometimes did, overcompensating, as if she might miss it. He set it directly in her open hand with the quiet efficiency of someone returning something that had always been hers. Then, in the voice she had filed away and left alone for 3 years. Careful, sweetheart. This city's got no patience for people it doesn't notice. Rose stood very still. There was a quality in those words that she needed a moment to locate. It wasn't sympathy, she had extensive experience with sympathy and it sounded nothing like this. It wasn't condescension, which she had even more experience with and could identify at 30 feet. It was something closer to recognition. The particular tone of someone who understood, from their own long acquaintance, what it meant to move through a city that was always half a second away from deciding you weren't worth the interruption. She opened her mouth to say thank you. He was already reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. How much for all of it? Rose paused. I'm sorry. The cart. Everything on it. What do you get for the whole thing? She had never been asked that before. She did not have an answer prepared, which was unusual for her. She ran the math: gardenias at 12, sunflowers at 8, carnations at 10, current inventory, Tuesday pricing, and gave him a number. He handed her a folded stack of bills without looking at them. Did not ask for change. Did not wait for her to count it. He simply transferred the stack from his hand to hers with the same clean, unhurried directness with which he had returned the cane, and then his footsteps moved toward the gate, all 4 security sets reforming around him without a word, and within 11 seconds the particular pressure his presence created in the air around Gate 7 had moved away and was gone. Rose stood behind her empty cart. She counted the bills. $400. She stood there for what was probably longer than she realized, one hand on the cart rail, the other closed around the money, and she let herself replay that voice one more time. Not the words. The quality underneath the words. The unhurried warmth of it. The complete absence of performance. She had heard his name whispered in this terminal in a dozen different registers of fear. He ran his operation out of the East Coast, but Chicago was his second city, the one he flew into every Tuesday without fail, regular as weather. She had heard the gate manager's voice tighten when he spotted the entourage coming through. She had heard, once, 2 of the charter crew use a phrase, "when Bruno flies," with the specific careful neutrality of people discussing whether they had no power over. Whatever this man was, whatever he had done or built or decided to become, there was something in that voice that did not belong to the version of him that people were afraid of. Something that had been there long enough to settle in and stay. Rose thought, standing alone at her empty cart with $400 in her hand and the October wind beginning to move through Gate 7. Whoever that man is, someone in this world loves him. She tucked the money into the inside pocket of her jacket. She folded up the empty cart. She stood for another moment in the sound of the terminal, the heel strikes and suitcase wheels and the distant Gulfstream spooling up somewhere beyond the tarmac fence, and she let herself feel, just briefly, the strange and uncomplicated warmth of having been treated like someone worth noticing. Then she started packing up for the afternoon. She did not know, standing there in the bright October morning with the sky sharp and cold and the gardenias already gone, that she had just heard the voice she would be willing to cross a live runway in the dark to save. She did not know that in 14 hours, she would be in a maintenance closet near Hangar 4 when the door opened and that same sky fell entirely to pieces. She just stood in the morning with her empty cart and her $400 and the ghost of a voice that felt, for no reason she could fully explain, like something she had been waiting to hear for a long time. Earl's Diner on South Cicero had no sign worth reading and no menu worth laminating, but it had a corner window booth that stayed warm until closing, and Earl himself, heavy-set, Georgian by birth, suspicious of most things but not of Rose, who brought her a bowl of chili without being asked and refilled her water twice without making it a conversation. Today he made it a conversation. "You sell out early." "Somebody bought the whole cart." Earl set the water pitcher down. "Whole cart." "All of it." He made a sound that meant he had opinions about this but was choosing, for once, to keep them. He refilled her water and went back to the counter. Rose wrapped both hands around the chili bowl and let the warmth move up through her palms. She had told Earl her history once, in pieces, over the course of a slow February when the terminal had been quiet for 2 weeks and she'd had nothing to do but sit in this booth and exist. Peoria. The middle daughter. A schoolteacher mother and a postal worker father who did everything right and still couldn't outrun an insurance company that had decided a 16-year-old girl's degenerative retinal condition was, technically, a pre-existing condition and therefore, technically, not their problem. By the time the coverage was fought and partially won, the window for intervention had closed. She aged out of foster care at 18 with a donated cane, a Greyhound ticket, and $40 that lasted her 3 days in Chicago before she understood, with complete clarity, that the city was not going to make room for her, and that she was going to have to make room for herself. Gate 7 had been that room. What she didn't tell Earl, what she didn't tell anyone, because it sounded like the kind of thing people filed under coping mechanism when it was actually just fact, was what losing her sight had done to everything else. It hadn't simply sharpened her hearing. It had reorganized it. Rewired it. Given it a precision that she had spent years learning to trust and then weaponize quietly. She could identify a Gulfstream V from a Bombardier Challenger by engine pitch alone at 200 yards. She could follow a conversation at 30 feet through a crowded terminal the way a skilled reader follows a single thread through a dense page. She could hear the tremor of a lie in a person's voice, the microscopic hesitation, the breath held a half-beat too long, the slight elevation in pitch that the speaker never noticed and the listener almost never caught, the way a tuning fork catches a false note from across a room. She did not consider this a gift. She considered it the terms of a deal she hadn't agreed to but had decided to honor. "Cold tonight," Earl said from the counter. "I know. Shelter on Halstead fills up fast on Tuesdays." "I know that too." He didn't push further. That was the thing about Earl, he understood the architecture of a conversation that wasn't asking for solutions. Rose finished the chili. She sat for another few minutes in the warm booth, listening to the kitchen sounds and the traffic on Cicero and the distant thread of a siren moving north. Then she pulled on her jacket, folded her cane to traveling length, and stepped out into a night that had dropped 15 degrees since morning. The bus to Halstead would be standing room only by now. She knew that without checking. She also knew the maintenance closet near Hangar 4 would be unlocked. It always was on Tuesdays. The overnight crew left it that way when the temperature fell below 40, an informal mercy for people who needed it, offered without paperwork or eye contact. Rose turned toward the terminal. The cold moved in around her like a second dark. She walked into it. 8 feet by 6. Rose knew this because she had paced it. It smelled like jet fuel and industrial cleaner and the faint ghost of someone's forgotten lunch, something with onions, weeks ago, absorbed permanently into the concrete wall. She had arranged her donated stadium blanket in the gap between the utility shelf and the back wall, flat against the floor, invisible to anyone who entered without switching on the overhead light. Nobody ever switched on the overhead light. She had been almost asleep, that particular half-depth where sound still registered but stopped meaning anything, when the door opened. 2 sets of footsteps. No lights. No greeting. Rose went completely still. Not the stillness of sleep. The other kind. The first voice was foreign. Clipped. Businesslike in a register that had nothing to do with business. It spoke in Russian first, short, declarative bursts that Rose caught in pieces, enough to identify the language, not enough to fully reconstruct the sentences. Then it switched to English with the precision of someone who reserved their second language exclusively for things that could not afford to be misunderstood. Confirm the device. Rear seat panel. Pressure triggered at altitude. 40,000 feet. Nothing left. Rose did not breathe. The second voice arrived and her entire spine went cold. She knew it immediately and completely, the same way she knew the Gulfstream from the Challenger, the same way she knew Gerald's heel strike from the Senator's shuffle. She had heard this voice laugh with the bodyguards near Gate 7. She had heard it recite flight plans to the tower in the flat, professional cadence of a man entirely comfortable with authority. She had heard it tell the fueling crew, just last week, that the Cubs bullpen was going to be the death of him personally. Captain Victor Hale's voice, in this moment, sounded nothing like any of those. Bruno boards at 10. Storm system gives us weather cover. By the time O'Hare figures out what dropped off radar, we're already across the state line. Silence. Footsteps retreating. The door clicked shut. Rose lay without moving for 60 full seconds. She counted each one against her own heartbeat, which was doing something loud and unsteady that she did not have time for right now. Then she sat up in the dark. Bruno. The man with the warm voice. The man who had crouched down on a public pavement, without performance or condescension, and placed her cane back in her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. The man who had said, "This city's got no patience for people it doesn't notice." Rose sat in the dark and let the full weight of what she was now carrying settle onto her chest like a stone. Then she stood up. 200 steps from the maintenance block to the outer security booth at the south gate. Rose knew this the way she knew everything about this terminal, by body, by repetition, by the specific sound her cane made on each surface transition along the route. She covered it in under 3 minutes. Breathing hard. Cane clicking double time on wet pavement. The rain had started. Doyle was on duty. She knew before she reached the booth, recognized the particular bored weight of his presence the way she recognized everything else. Doyle had thrown her off this property twice for loitering, both times with the cheerful efficiency of a man who considered it a highlight of his shift. She hadn't finished her second sentence before she heard him reach for his radio. "Lady. I don't have time for this tonight. There is a bomb on Bruno's plane." The pilot, "Hale, I heard him," he said. "Rear seat panel, pressure triggered, 10 o'clock departure." "Yeah." The radio crackled. "I've got a walk-in at the south booth. Gonna need an escort to the parking exit." The second checkpoint was 140 steps north. The officer there was younger, and he had the quality of someone who had not yet learned which people were worth listening to. He actually let her finish. She felt him leaning forward slightly, that particular shift in a person's posture that she'd learned to read through the change in their breathing. Then his supervisor's voice arrived from somewhere behind him, flat and final. "We get this every few weeks. Someone figures out the terminal layout, runs a story to get access. Don't engage." 2 officers walked her out through the parking structure. One told her, not unkindly, that if she came back tonight they would call Chicago PD. The door closed behind her. Rose stood on the sidewalk in the rain. No phone, broken 2 weeks ago, not replaced. No shoes, still on the closet floor where she'd stepped out of them to feel the cold and stay awake. No identification that would move a single person past the conclusion they had already reached about what she was. 19 minutes. She stood in the rain and she thought about a voice that had said, just that morning, "This city's got no patience for people it doesn't notice." She thought about the weight of that. The long, accumulated weight of it. Then she turned toward the perimeter fence. She was done being someone this city didn't notice. The gap in the chain-link fence was on the northwest corner of the outer perimeter, behind the drainage ditch that flooded in heavy rain. It was flooding now. Rose found the fence by feel, both hands moving along the cold metal until the gap opened under her palms, and she pushed through without slowing, felt the metal edge catch and shred the hem of her dress on the way through. She didn't stop. Her bare feet hit asphalt. Then mud. Then asphalt again. 17 minutes. The runway presented itself to her ears before anything else, a vast, organized noise landscape that she had heard from the perimeter fence 100 times but never from inside. The geography of it arrived in layers. Engine roar, 30 feet left, a jet holding position, the pitch telling her it was spooling but not moving, not yet. Ground crew vehicle somewhere ahead, the diesel rumble of it moving perpendicular to her path. And beneath all of it, the rain, which was both the most useful and most dangerous thing out here, because it sharpened every surface echo while simultaneously drowning the smaller sounds she needed most. She moved in a straight line, counting steps. The wind shifted pitch slightly, a drop in tone that meant she had crossed the runway centerline. She adjusted 2 degrees right. The surface under her feet changed from coarse tarmac to the slightly softer give of the grass shoulder, and she corrected again, heart hammering. A Cessna somewhere ahead, the engine pitch rising, taxiing toward the north runway. She stopped dead, let it pass left of her, and counted 4 full seconds, moved again. She fell the first time on a seam in the asphalt she didn't hear coming. Both knees hit hard. She was up in 3 seconds. The second fall was mud. She lost a full breath on impact. She kept moving. Then, through the rain and the engine noise and her own ragged breathing, a voice. "Sir, stairs are clear. Weather's moving in fast." Tony. Angelo's lead bodyguard. She knew that voice from 3 years of Tuesday mornings. Rose ran toward it with everything she had left. She broke through the perimeter line at 10:02 p.m. 2 officers tackled her before she cleared the apron edge. Her cane went spinning across the wet tarmac. Her glasses cracked against the pavement, she heard the lens split, felt the frame go sideways on her face. One officer had her left arm. The other had her right shoulder, pressing her down. She stopped fighting them. She didn't need to move. She just needed to be heard. He spoke Russian. "There is a device under the rear seat panel." He said your name. He said tonight. Not hysterical. Not begging. Every word aimed with surgical precision at the specific sound of a man breathing at the base of the jet stairs, that particular quality of stillness she had identified on 47 Tuesday mornings. The tarmac went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the rain stopping. One hand came up. A single, unhurried gesture. His security team froze. The officers holding Rose felt the shift in the air before they understood it, and their grip loosened by half a degree, enough to tell her the gesture had worked. Above them all, at the top of the jet stairs, Captain Victor Hale stood in his pressed uniform with his square jaw set and his hands on the railing. Clean. Composed. The face of someone who had spent 15 years being the most trustworthy person in any room. His right hand moved toward the inside of his jacket. It was not a large movement. It lasted less than 2 seconds before he caught himself and stopped. Angelo Bruno saw it. That was all. His 4 bodyguards moved in unison without a spoken word. Hale was face down on the jet stairs in under 4 seconds. The plane was evacuated. The bomb squad from O'Hare arrived in 11 minutes and found the device exactly where Rose had said, a compact, pressure-triggered explosive fixed beneath the rear cabin seat panel with industrial adhesive, engineered to detonate at cruising altitude. Later, federal investigators would identify it as Russian military surplus. They would connect Hale to a foreign intelligence network. They would trace it back to a New Jersey shipping deal, 18 months prior, that Angelo's organization had unknowingly disrupted. A contract killing. Dressed as a mechanical failure. But none of that existed yet. Right now there was only the rain, and Rose on her knees on the wet tarmac, shaking so hard her teeth clicked together in a rhythm she couldn't control. Angelo Bruno walked back down the stairs alone. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture to his security or look back at the plane or acknowledge the 11 people standing in the rain watching him. He crossed directly to where Rose knelt, removed his jacket, and wrapped it around her shoulders in one clean motion. Then he lifted her off the ground and carried her to the limousine. He didn't look back at the jet once. The floor was warm. That was the first thing Rose registered, heated stone beneath her bare feet, which was so far outside the inventory of surfaces she woke up on that she lay still for a full 30 seconds, cataloging the room by sound before she trusted any of it. Lake sounds. The particular low conversation of water against a shoreline, close enough to be immediate. A radiator ticking quietly in the far corner. High ceilings, she could tell by the way the room held sound, the slight echo of her own breathing returning to her with space around it. Cashmere blanket. She knew cashmere from its weight and its silence. She was not dreaming. She had never in her life dreamed anything this specific. A knock at the doorframe, unhurried, not demanding an answer, simply announcing a presence. I've left breakfast on the table to your left. Clothing on the chair beside it. There's no rush on either. The voice was a woman's. Chicagoan, older, with the particular economy of someone who had learned long ago that kindness didn't require performance. She was already retreating before Rose could respond. Rose dressed. 8. Found the window by the lake sound and stood beside it for a while. Angelo came to the doorway mid-morning. She heard him stop at the threshold, heard, specifically, that he did not cross it. He waited. The waiting was its own kind of statement. You can come in, Rose said. They talked for 3 hours. Not about Hale. Not about the device, or the federal investigators, or the arrest that she could hear referenced in low urgent tones elsewhere in the house. He didn't explain his world to her and didn't ask her to account for hers. They talked about Peoria, and flower carts, and what the lake sounded like at 3 in the morning when the city finally ran out of noise. They talked about the specific loneliness of living among millions of people who had collectively decided you weren't worth the interruption. He asked questions the way people asked questions when they actually wanted the answers, without rushing toward the next one, without using her response as a bridge to something he'd already planned to say. He told her almost nothing about himself. She found, unexpectedly, that she didn't need him to. By afternoon, the story had been named and contained. Foiled aircraft tampering incident. Angelo's legal team had moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had extensive practice managing the distance between what happened and what was said to have happened. Hale's name was public. The word assassination appeared nowhere in any official statement and would not. Angelo sat alone in his study for a long time before he picked up the phone. One call. Brief. A third party, someone Rose would never meet and Angelo would never name. That evening, his assistant appeared at the study door. It's arranged. Kid from Pilsen. 17. He'll be at gate 7 tomorrow morning, 6:30. Angelo nodded. Then, after a moment, make sure he keeps the layout exactly. Gardenias left, sunflowers center, carnations right. His assistant wrote it down without comment. She didn't want the corner to go empty, Angelo said. Not to anyone in particular. He turned back to the window and the lake, and let the city hold its noise for a while. 1 month later, Gate 7 smelled exactly the same. Jet fuel and ambition and the faint cold edge of Lake Michigan moving through the terminal doors every time they opened. The flower cart was still in its spot, 6 feet left of the entrance, exactly where it had always been. The kid from Pilsen had kept the layout precisely, gardenias left, sunflowers center, carnations right. He'd added succulents on Fridays because a regular had asked for them. Rose had heard this and approved. She was not there to hear it in person. She was at Northwestern Memorial in a paper gown that crinkled when she breathed, sitting on the edge of an exam table and mapping an unfamiliar building by sound, the particular echo of a hospital that never fully went quiet, the soft compression of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the ventilation system running slightly louder on the surgical floor than the ones below. 2 floors down, Angelo Bruno sat alone in a waiting room chair with a paper cup of bad hospital coffee. No entourage. No security. No performance of any kind. Just a man watching morning traffic move across the Michigan Avenue Bridge, waiting to find out what the next few hours would decide. Dr. Patricia Holt had been precise in her assessment 3 weeks earlier, the damage was advanced, the reversal incomplete, the outcome not guaranteed. There was a meaningful chance. Rose had decided that was sufficient. The surgery took 4 hours. The bandage removal happened 12 days later. Afternoon light through frosted glass. Dr. Holt narrated each step in a low, steady voice. Angelo stood against the far wall with his hands in his pockets, saying nothing. The final bandage came away. The light arrived like a physical weight, warm and enormous and indiscriminate, flooding everything at once. Rose breathed through it. Let her eyes adjust by degrees. Let the shapes resolve slowly from brightness into form. The nearest face came into focus. Angelo Bruno was 51 years old. Strong jaw. Dark eyes. The face of a man who had spent decades making decisions that cost other people their sleep, older than she'd constructed from his voice, harder around the edges, more tired in the ways that didn't show until you were close enough to look directly. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, full and uncomplicated, the smile of someone seeing exactly what they had hoped to see. "You look like your voice," she said quietly. Angelo looked at the window. Then back at her. When he spoke, it was the same as it had always been, warm, unhurried, completely at odds with every version of the world he lived in. "You look like someone this city should have noticed a long time ago." The afternoon light held them both. Neither of them looked away. Thanks for watching till the very end. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be dropping another unforgettable story tomorrow, so make sure you don't miss it.